Purim begins on Wednesday night, March 7th. The holiday is loved by Jewish children and adults alike because it's fun. But hidden by the fun is the fact that it's one of our most mysterious, if not downright questionable, holidays. Purim is based on the story of Queen Esther and puts soap operas and country music to shame by comparison. It takes place in ancient Persia, which is now Iran, during the reign of King Ahasuerus, okay, between 486 and 465 BC. The story begins with the king, after drinking wine for several days at a festival, ordering his wife, Vashti, to come out and display her beauty to his guests. She refused. The king gets his PR people together and wonders what they should do about this. They decide that for her to go unpunished would send the message to all women of the realm that it was okay to disobey their husbands, and we sure wouldn't want that to happen. So Vashti loses her crown and is no longer the queen and gets sent away. Ahasuerus needs a new queen. Mordecai, a Jew who is raising his much younger, orphaned, and beautiful cousin Esther, sends her to the king's beauty contest with the instructions that she isn't to tell anyone she is Jewish. She wins, and Esther is now the new queen. One of the rules of her new status is that she is not allowed to enter the presence of her husband without being invited. The punishment for doing so is death. Keep that in mind, you'll need it later in the story. Mordecai, a known Jew, wants to keep tabs on how Esther is doing, so he hangs out near the king's gate all the time, just listening. While he's doing this, he hears two gatekeepers plotting to kill the king. He tells this to Esther, who in turn tells it to the king in Mordecai's name, and the gatekeepers were hanged. In the meantime, Haman was made the prime minister of sorts to Ahasuerus. The king instructed everyone in the realm to bow down and prostrate themselves before Haman, but Mordecai refused to do so because he was Jewish and wouldn't bow to anyone except God. This enraged Haman, and he offered the king a sizable bribe to let him kill all the Jews. The king agreed. Haman cast lots, known as a pur, to determine the date of the slaughter, and letters were sent to all the powers that be all over the kingdom that all Jews, including women and children, were to be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month. Mordecai is a bit distressed by this whole scenario, so he goes to visit Esther and tells her that she should go intervene with the king on behalf of the Jews, since she is one herself. Esther points out that she would probably be killed for going to the king without an invitation, but Mordecai doesn't see this as any big problem and tells her to do it anyway. So Esther goes to the king without being bidden. He forgets about killing her because she is so drop-dead gorgeous, and he tells her that he will grant any request that she has. Her only request was for the king and Haman, and only them, to come to a feast she had prepared for them on the following night, and they agreed to go. Haman's pretty puffed up at the thought that he is the only man invited other than the king, but his happiness was marred by the fact that Mordecai is still out there at the gate refusing to bow to him. So he orders a gallows to be built 50 cubits high to hang Mordecai on. That's about 83 feet. While this is going on, the king couldn't sleep and decides to catch up on reading the books of Records and Chronicles. That's the biblical equivalent of old newspapers. While reading, he realizes that he has never rewarded Mordecai for saving his life by ratting on the gatekeepers. So he calls Haman and tells him to outfit Mordecai in royal attire and buy him a horse to ride on. That makes Haman even madder than he was before. The next night is the feast with Esther. She gets the king and Haman both quite drunk. The king tells her again that he will grant her every wish, and she tells him that she is Jewish, how distressed she is at his edict to kill all the Jews, and asks for mercy on her people. The king is enraged that someone has done something to distress the gorgeous Esther, and he goes outside for a walk. While he's gone, the drunken Haman makes a pass at Esther. At the same time, the king comes back, sees what's going on, and has Haman hanged on the gallows that had been built for Mordecai. He goes even further and announces that instead of the Jews being killed on the 13th day of the 12th month, they could go out and kill everyone who plotted against them. In case they couldn't get it all done in one day, he added the 14th day also. On those 2 days, the Jews killed 75,000 of their oppressors, including Haman's 10 sons, and on the 15th and 16th day of Adar, they rested and celebrated. Those 2 days have ever since been known as Purim. This is a great story, but every scholarly work I consulted in researching this sermon agrees that it was probably a fictional work by an unknown author. No one has an explanation for why it was included in our scriptures. It seems to be agreed that the king was actually Xerxes, who was a real king in Persia, but he could not have unknowingly taken a Jewish wife because he was only allowed to choose a wife from among 7 approved families, none of which were Jewish. Numerous rabbis from the 1st century BC to the 4th century AD argued that the book of Esther was fiction and should not be allowed in our scriptures. But by then, the holiday was so popular that their efforts to eliminate Purim fell on deaf ears. In truth, many of our Purim customs aren't even based on the story of Esther, but rather on the Persian New Year celebration, which began on the spring equinox. That celebration involved masquerades and inverting the usual customs, just like we do on Purim. Another interesting aspect of the book of Esther, which is pointed out in Bernard W. Anderson's book, Understanding the Old Testament, is the fact that there is not one reference to God or the tenets of the Jewish faith in the entire book. Another good argument for not including it in Scripture. We will never know for sure if the story of Esther is fiction, but evidence does strongly indicate that it is. Why then has it been celebrated and revered by Jews for thousands of years? I think the answer to that is that the book of Esther reflects our determination to refuse to be assimilated into whatever larger culture we Jews find ourselves living in. We are different, we know we are different, and we like it that way. We didn't tolerate anyone trying to change that 3,000 years ago, and we won't tolerate it now. Whether it is Haman or Hitler, if you attempt to eradicate us, you will fail. That is what that short little book of Scripture says, and that's why we love it. I think it's safe to say that as long as there are Jews, the book of Esther will remain Scripture. It doesn't matter if the story is true or not, because its message is and always will be. We are Jews and we will survive.